I'm here.
Oh, you're there. You just thought,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm just not visible.
All right, then. That's fine. So this is a meeting of the committee, obviously Friday, October 6th. I'd like to open the meeting. It's 9:32 this morning. And the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda itself and introduction of late items. And I'm also proposing a revision to the timing and how we schedule this. So we have a late item to add, which is the 5-year financial plan development process and timeline that all members of the committee have seen. It was forwarded previously and is to be included in the agenda. And I would, would that come under new business?
6.3 maybe, like added at the end under other business, perhaps?
Yes, new business.
Yeah, I'll throw it as new business. And well, I'd like to bring it first before we do the quarterly variance. Only that hopefully Joyce will be available for that. In terms of capital project update, I'd like to move that back a bit and bring forward asset management analysis 6.2 to be presented right after the business arising from the minutes, which is the auditor appointment.
Okay.
That would allow Joyce to participate in that.
Right.
And,
I can always provide Joyce an update offline on capital projects if desired. So we could move section 5 to after section 6 completely. If that
yeah,
works.
okay, let's do that then. That's a good point, Liam. Judy?
I was just going to move the adoption of the amended agenda, including late items.
Thank you. Seconded by Joyce. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So let's move forward. We have adoption of minutes, 2.1, minutes of August 30th, FAC meeting, with a recommendation the minutes of the committee meeting held August 30th, 2023 be adopted. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Joyce and Judy. Any questions or comments on those minutes? Seeing none. All in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Thank you. That's passed. Thank you. Any public comments, Steph? No. Moving on. Business arising from the minutes. 4.1, the auditor appointment recommendation. Kristen provided you with her report, and members of the committee also saw the response from the one firm that provided its response regards to their call for RFP. So, Kristen, is there anything you'd like to say about that?
Yes, sure. So just following up from the report, we did the RFP. It was open from, I think I put in my report August 18th. It was actually issued August 16th. It was open through September 15th. BDO was the sole respondent to that RFP. That is our incumbent existing auditor. So that I think requires then that there be a recommendation to appoint BDO for a further 5-year contract to undertake financial auditing services for us. One of the things in the RFP that I felt was really important was to bring back on-site auditing services over through COVID and all of that. I think remote auditing, it's a great tool. It's a portal. We upload all of our supporting documents, and we do it through that. What I found through that completely remote process is that you really lose that opportunity to just speak quickly, ad hoc conversations with auditors, where things that may take half an hour to explain via an email could actually just be explained in about a 30-second conversation. So I think that what the remote, while you think that intuitively, you think that it's a lot cheaper to do it that way because you avoid the travel and accommodation costs. I think that that the quality of the conversations that happen between the auditor and the client just are going to be improved. So I asked specifically that that there be an opportunity for a blended on-site and remote option in there. So they have responded with pricing that does anticipate that they will be expecting to be on site a little bit. So that is one change that going forward, I think is really important to recommend to any auditor. So the fee, 61,000 the first year, rising by about 5% each year to 74 over the course of the 5-year term. So I mean, we didn't have any other comparators. So I think that that's a reasonable fee. It's in line with what they had quoted us last year. There were additional costs last year associated with some new accounting standards related to information technology and your you know, your controls over IT and that kind of thing. There's always going to be new standards that are implemented in any given year. So we always have to anticipate that that the costs for overseeing and implementation of new standards are going to be in addition to the basic audit fee. So I'm happy with the fee, and there is an option there to prepare the financial statements. So that is an added service that they provide. We don't use that service. We prepare our own financial statements, but we have relied on BDO in prior years to prepare the financial statements for us. So it's important that they are aware and they are able to provide that service in addition to the basic audit fee. So yep, I think I'm seeking that the Finance Advisory Committee make a recommendation to council to appoint BDO as the auditor for the next 5-year term.
I'll move that recommendation.
I'll
The
second it.
recommendation in the agenda has a couple.
Fred,
of
you're
whereas
mute.
in it. Is that the one you want, Kristen?
I was moving the recommendation in the
Thank
agenda.
you.
Okay,
Okay, so moved by Allison and seconded by Judy. Any comments or questions of Kristen? Yes, Joyce?
I just want to say I'm really pleased that we actually don't have a choice, and I'm pleased that our incumbent is the one. To be honest, in all the years that I've been on the Finance Committee, the only continuity has been our auditor, and I really, really value that. Oh, Allison as well, sorry, but in terms of staff, that's the only continuity, so I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments? I'll just make one comment. I think the process was appropriate and as it was handled. And I make a comment that I think it's also appropriate that Christine remains as lead for the audit, which I think is actually a value to the organization. In most normal situations, there is a rotation of partners, but we do have new partners doing both in the names of Pan Yu, who does quality review, and Brian Zabo. So we do get a sense of rotation in terms of new support provided. So I think that's something that is positive. And I don't think we really have to reconsider Christine's involvement as lead until something that might be discussed at the next update in 5 years. Would be my comments.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing else, and we have the recommendation. Do I have to read it out, Steph?
sorry.
Should I read it out, the recommendation?
Sure.
Okay. I think we've already had a mover and seconder though, but anyway,
I
whereas,
could read it.
would you like to read it, Allison?
Well, I guess because I moved it, I really probably should have read it.
All right, I'll let you do that then.
Okay, whereas a request for proposals for an auditor was tendered on August 16th, 2023. And whereas one response was received from Bowen Island Municipality's current auditor, therefore be it resolved that the Finance Advisory Committee recommend to council that the contract for audit services for 2023 to 2027 be awarded to BDO.
Okay, thank you. We've had a mover and seconder. Any other final points or questions? Seeing none, all in favor, please.
All right.
Thank you. And that's approved. Thanks, Kristen. That was a good effort and excellent job. Okay. I think the next point, based on our sort of reorganized agenda, was to address the asset management analysis, which is reported as
Fred?
Yes,
It just occurred to me, does Joyce have to leave early?
yes, she does at 10.
So the only other decision item is the timeline where we might still need a quorum.
Oh, I see. You're with regards to the schedule.
Yeah,
Okay, well, we can do that first then. Here. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, our interest in this is the fact that management has in fact completed a comprehensive review of its requirements, and it's a process and timeline. And the other part of it is that we have some involvement identified as December 7th. It's an FAC meeting. And on March 20th of next year, as a final presentation of draft 5-year financial plan. So we'd like to bring this information in for as reviewed by members of the committee. And so, Judy?
If I may have one comment, the December 7th date is an Islands Trust quarterly meeting that I would have to attend. So I do have a conflict with that one meeting, if that can be adjusted.
Okay. Maybe we can look at that. I'm pretty wide open in terms of that time. Anybody else has an obvious conflict on that date?
I don't have any obvious conflicts, but I do have an obvious comment.
Sure.
Not one of our meetings has been when it's been scheduled, except perhaps this one. So I just have to say, if we're going to have a plan, can we stick to the date? please?
is December 8th work, Judy?
I believe so, yes. The 7th is the last day.
That's the Friday, so could we move it to the 8th, Kristen?
Excuse me. I'm good for the 8th.
Okay.
So do we need a motion for that?
Yeah.
So moved.
9:30, it's 9:30, a good time via Zoom.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Joyce, if you have an appointment, you're gonna be 9:30 a.m. Friday, December 8th, pinky promise.
Yeah, just a reminder, this was supposed to be only an auditor's
Meeting,
selection
yeah.
meeting.
Yeah. I don't know that we need a
Well,
motion.
why don't we just pass a motion to say that the audit, the Finance Advisory Committee recommends that council adopt the budget schedule as amended at their meeting.
Okay, we can do that
Yeah,
with the revised or
yeah.
amended with our next meeting being December the 8th. Okay, so Allison, you've actually said the motion. Why don't we just want to move it? You're gonna move it? Second, please.
Yeah.
Judy, thank you. Any other further questions on this? I'm pleased to see this, and that'll be fine. All in favor?
All right.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. That's accommodating.
Okay, and now we'll move on to the asset management analysis, please. Kristen? I
Thank
believe
you.
yours.
So in light of not having a full asset management plan at this point, I really struggled last year with making recommendations as to what we needed to set aside for reserve contributions. I decided that I would just kind of go ahead and look at, based on our own accounting records and based on the information that's easily available to us in our accounting records, in our capital asset lead sheets, those sorts of things, that I would compile all of that data and then sit down with all of the department leads for the easy things like fleet and fire equipment and that kind of stuff. I sat down with them. I talked to each of those managers and kind of asked them, in your best guess, what is a reasonable replacement cost for this piece of equipment? What is a reasonable replacement cost? Would you actually replace that, or would you get something different? And if you wanted something different, what would that cost? And when would you need to do that? So I just spent time with all of our managers and asked them all of those questions. I compiled all that data, and I've got some information, I think, that in the interim, until we get more progression on our asset management plan, I've got this chart which will provide some guidance to me as to where we should be recommending that reserve fund contributions, what levels of reserve fund contributions we should be making. And if I just kind of go through the chart right now, I'll pick one asset system and we'll just kind of walk through it. Let's pick one of the equipment ones. So if we take, for example, our fire and emergency vehicles, the first one. And I've got
Kristen,
them. Yeah,
Kristen, where's the chart?
it's in the agenda.
Okay. I
It's
can share it.
page 12 of 12.
Oh. Sorry.
It's the same chart that you saw.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't flip backwards. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay.
I haven't had enough coffee yet.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Steph. Our fire and emergency vehicles, if we were to replace what we had and what, with the technology that we should be using at the time, we're looking at a replacement cost of just over $4.4 million as of today. And in order to sustain that, we would need to set aside $177,000 each year over the estimated useful life of that equipment. So given the condition of that equipment as it is today, that means we should already have about $1.5 million in reserve funds. And you can see we actually only have $124,000. So that's where we get this infrastructure deficit concept of where the difference between what we should have right now in the bank versus what we do have. And that shows that we should actually have about $1.3 million in the bank today. So in order to catch up, I said, okay, let's decide that we're going to catch that up over 10 years. So all of these inputs, they're all changeable. I can make new assumptions and just update this schedule based on the spreadsheets that are behind this schedule that really drive. This is just the final product. But if I suggested that, okay, well, we need 15 years or we need 20 years to catch up, then that annual replacement contribution would change based on that. So when we add what we should be putting away every year right now, 177,000, and we add our annual catch up to that, that means we should really be putting away just over $300,000 a year in order to sustain and maintain that fleet of fire trucks and response vehicles that we have. Now, then the last two columns are kind of interesting too, because with every capital asset, the question of, well, who's going to pay for that capital asset? So in some respects, we've used debt to pay for things. In some respect, we've accessed our reserve funding to pay for it. So who should pay for it? And I can allocate the cost of that replacement between the current contributors through taxes and reserve funding, or we can shift some of that to future taxpayers and say, well, we're going to access debt for some of those replacements down the future. So again, like I think in this case, I used a 75% current contribution and a 25% future contribution. Fire trucks are more typically expensive pieces of equipment. They have a bit of a longer lifespan. So in that case, maybe it is appropriate that future taxpayers share in the burden of some of that replacement. But for the smaller equipment fleets, they have anything within 10 years that always needs to be paid by everyday general today taxpayers paying from operations through reserve contributions. So I went through every single system that I have in the books, and I went through that same process with all of them. Again, talking to the managers, what would you replace it with when it comes time for replacement? And I came up with this kind of tool to help guide what I'm going to put into the budget for recommendations for reserve fund contributions. So it's just something I wanted to share with you, some work that we've done in finance here. to kind of support our asset management planning decisions that go on and support what we're going to put into our 5-year financial plan as far as reserve fund contributions. And it's a really high level. It's really first cut at it, but at least we're not flying blind at it, I think. And I have something to go back to and say, this is why we really need to focus on contributing to our reserve funds to support what we have. Every single time that we make a decision to add new assets, it just increases the burden more and more and more. So I just wanted to run this by you, get your thoughts on it, maybe get some advice from the committee to see if this is something that was helpful or any, adjustments that we can look at making to it in order to make it more useful.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments for Kristen? Joyce?
I've got two completely different ones. I'll start out with, I see that we're saying we need 25 years to catch up on culverts. It seems to me that we don't have 25 years to catch up on culverts. I was kind of surprised at that. I mean, obviously you're getting the input from the experts, but the way things have been going for us, I wonder whether that's maybe putting it out too long in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that we have lots of new culverts, and so maybe that's how we're getting there. But I almost wonder whether we should be breaking them into two pieces, culverts that are over 15 years old or whatever the reasonable lifespan is, what percentage are in that category and what percentage are in the older category might help us. And the second one is, I see the old fire hall being decommissioned for $250,000. Does that mean being ripped down?
There is, at this point, there's no plan for the old fire hall. Our approach has been, well, if it's not an asset that we can use for our own purposes, then we can't let that building sit there and go moldy. So yeah, there's a cost to decommission a building. You can't let it just go into decline. And with the costs associated with it, of course, are demolition and carting that stuff, and then asbestos remediation, that kind of thing. So there would be land remediation costs associated with that too, to restore it. So yeah, it's a high level estimate, but certainly it's something that we need to consider.
Well, just want everybody to know that I've been doing a little talking to people about what we could use the fire hall for. And a teen center sounds like a really positive thing to use it for. So if it's not actually scheduled for decommissioned, I think there will be a delegation at some point wanting to come and talk about what might be possible. And we all realize it may not be possible, but our teens need a place.
Thank you, Joyce. Liam, I think you wish to respond, and Judy after.
Yeah. Judy, I'm glad to hear you're talking to the community about ideas. I do want to caution that though, because the whole reason for building a new fire hall is because that one is deemed unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
So I struggle very much with the idea of allowing others to use that space. And so I would not want to be the one that would authorize the use of that space for any other entity, unless we were actually selling it or somehow creating a very strong liability barrier or something. We do also have an alternative plan for the youth teen center, but it is hinging on a couple of dominoes that need to kind of fall. Maybe that's a bad analogy, but the plan for a while has been that once we are able to get the utility operators out of the library space, they're currently using that library space right now. Once we're able to get them out of there to operate full-time from the water treatment plant, then we had identified that space for the teens, and we've identified some modest funding to renovate the space to make it more teen friendly. And for us, we think that that's actually quite an attractive space because right in the cove and close to the ferry and things like that. And
Great. Well, there's a group of people that are concerned about the teens, so we need, I just wanted to table that. When I saw the decommissioning, I wasn't planning on us having a conversation particularly.
right.
Thank you, Joyce. Kristen, did you have something in response? Okay, Judy, and then Allison.
So, sorry, Kristen in response or?
No, she said no.
Okay. The numbers on this, you've highlighted that it's all first draft. Is it safe to assume that the estimated replacement costs are on the high side? So conservative estimates in terms of what the assets currently are, and similarly the replacement costs are on the or the estimated replacement costs, are those on the high side? And then the number of years to catch up, are those on the low side?
To start with the estimated replacement cost for for all of the equipment, that all of that is very easy to measure. That's all actual. Our docks, I have very recent condition assessments and value. So some of that information is actually quite tangible. Some of it is more based on engineering estimates, we're going with best guess at this point, and until we complete those assessments and do that asset management work, we're going with a qualified opinion basis for replacement costs. So some of them are really good, some of them more best guess.
And some of them are current value, like, so our community center, for example, right, 18.7 is the actual, like that I would say is low. Like if we had to turn around and replace that building and go to the market today, it would be quite a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
As is, if we're talking about as is.
Yeah.
Okay, and the years?
The years are where it's my discretion, my kind of attempt to make it palatable in some way. I mean, ideally, we would have a very short time horizon to try and close those gaps, but that's just not realistic. And it's always going to be a mixture of taxpayers' ability to pay versus, what do we really need to make sure that we get in there so that we have the funding available to preserve the safety and able to support those assets into the future. So there's more room for extending the life of things. Speak to what Joyce said, like 25 years for culverts, it's probably too long. We should probably consider shortening that time period. But look at the numbers just based on culverts, and I mean, that would just make that replacement schedule unattainable and completely unachievable for a taxpayer's ability to pay. I mean, it already is. $10 million is already pretty darn out of the question of us having an ability to pay. Again, it's an illustrative concept, and this kind of needs to be the filter that we're using in all of our spending decisions going forward. Are we going to take on this new asset? Because don't forget, this is in the background.
It's important to know that this is a never-ending story. This is not a point in time that we get to and we're done.
Right.
Like, okay, we did it, we achieved it. So these years will be rolling, right?
Yeah.
And so as we replace that stock, we've got to save for replacing that again. And
Yeah.
so this is a But Kristen's frame of mind, I think, is quite good in the idea of catch-up, because we do have a catch-up period. But ultimately, once we get closer to having the established rates of reinvestment, so, covering off the actual reinvestment requirements, then it'll be smoothed out, but it'll be a forever story. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Allison?
Couple of things. So the issue when Joyce suggested we use the fire hall for a teen center, if I'm understanding Liam's response, it was on the basis that that building would fail in an earthquake. The library would fail in an earthquake. All the buildings, most of the older buildings in the Cove would fail in an earthquake. They're not post-seismic.
So my understanding, though, is that we had a specific study done on the fire hall that clearly identified that. I'm not sure
Because the fire hall has to be a post-seismic building.
right. So I'm not sure that we've identified that or done that work for other.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of buildings that exist on Bowen Island that if we had an earthquake, they would fail, including probably a bunch of houses. So I guess, is that the right standard, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other comment is when we got an estimated useful life, when I look up the estimated useful life for culverts on the website, I get a range of 25 to 50 years or 15 to 40 years, depending on, what they are. So my other question is, they could last longer than 25 years. So I'm assuming that they would only be replaced if they on an inspection were seen to starting to significantly rust or something like that. It's not that in 25 years we're going to replace this culvert because it was put in 25 years ago. Because we just inspected one here and it's been in for 40 years and it has absolutely no signs of rust or decomposition or anything else.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Judy?
And then my last question
Sorry. Okay.
is, Kristen, you said in doing the budget this year, you're going to increase. So am I understanding that this total annual contribution of $10 million is what you're going to put in the budget?
No, Councillor Morris, I'm going to use this as a tool to help guide what my reserve fund contributions are going to be. Am I going to put 10,022,148 in? No, probably not. I'm just using it as a tool to make guiding decisions.
So are you, yeah. So anyhow, all right. Don't get me going on the fact that we wasted the reserves we already had. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
I wish we'd had this type of document before we voted on becoming a municipality and we were negotiating with the province in terms of their contribution to help in that process. But I think, the 98 million target reserve fund balance today is absolutely terrifying, and or the infrastructure deficit, I suppose, is the worst. In terms of figuring out how we can either make ourselves more attractive for future contributors, or I guess, well, the grants are not factored into this at all, right? It's just debt and tax collection.
Yeah. Typically grants aren't out there for you to fix your old leaky, broken infrastructure. Typically grants are for new assets or something additional that you're providing to your community. So yeah, typically you're on the hook to look after what you have.
So we have to figure out how to make this document more affordable, or the end result to be more affordable. And if we dump it all on current taxes, then, you know, it's not going to be a place where a lot of people can live. So it's a really, really good information page, but it's terrifying.
Okay. Allison, is your hand is up, and
I stuck it up again, yes.
Please.
It's just a follow-up. Well, I remember, and I forgot to tell Kristen after the last time. When I remember we passed a resolution at the Rec Commission pre-COVID, or when just after the artificial turf field had been replaced, that there was an amount every year that was to go into a reserve fund for the replacement of that turf field. And Steph's nodding, she's remembering that conversation. So either we didn't do it or it's lost somewhere. I don't know if it was the revenue from the field was to go into a reserve fund every year, just anyhow. It was a flag to follow up to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Liam?
I would like to respond to both Councillor Morris and Getty's question/comments. So just quickly to Councillor Getty's concern, I agree with you. It is alarming to see the numbers, but I'm really glad that we are starting and have something here. This is fantastic as a starting place. And I think something that we need to do as we do more and more of this work, it'll become more refined, it'll become more accurate. And so these numbers will change with certainty. And so don't hold tight to them. They may go up, they may go down. And then one really important thing that we haven't done yet is ascribe what elements of this will be financed through debt. And so there may be opportunities for some grant funding, but a big part of it will be, okay, how much does the current user base need to pay for this versus future users? And so Kristen and I have talked a little bit about this, about all right, well, some assets like big fixed structures perhaps are going to live long enough so that future generations or future taxpayers should be contributing to that. So maybe we're adjusting the annual asset replacement value for that particular structure to half of what we really need. So we're going to fund half of the replacement value with reserve funds and half with debt. So we're sort of saying the current users are paying for half, future users will pay for half. For things like equipment and vehicles that wear out pretty quickly, the current users perhaps should be on the hook 100% for those. And so that's something that we need to tease out and have more discussions around, is to okay, well, what is a fair policy position around how we ascribe the replacement cost?
Okay.
And then just quickly on to Councillor Morris's question about the turf field. A couple things there is that the revenue from turf field is pretty minor when you factor in the maintenance and just staff time and all of those things. And then there was a previous consolidation of reserves. And so I'm not sure actually if that reserve was consolidated in that process, or whether that still stands.
So we would have used all of those funds in the replacement of the turf field a couple of years ago. And then, there is two schools of thought, whether you maintain reserves for all of your separate things and whether you just have one big capital asset reserve. That if you have the detail on all of your assets, you can certainly fund a single reserve. I kind of take a hybrid approach. I think it's important to maintain a reserve to support the assets by departments. And I think that's important from a planning perspective so that the manager can sort of rely on what is in a long-term reserve and come up with a replacement plan based on a fund that not everybody's fighting over the same fund. We have a roads reserve, we have a parks reserve, we have a recreation reserve. I wouldn't be recommending that we collapse any of those reserves. I believe we should maintain them. We have a fire reserve. I believe we should maintain those, and that provides some stability and some certainty for the department managers. If they know what their annual replacement funding is going to be, they can make recommendations as to how best to allocate those funds. So I believe what we have right now is the right number of reserves, and I wouldn't be suggesting that we create new ones or get rid of any of them. But to have an artificial turf reserve as opposed to a recreation reserve, I don't think that that's something necessary.
Okay, thank you. Allison, is your hand still up?
I put it back up again, yes.
Please.
So as Kristen was talking, I realized, because she had already talked about current contributors and future contributors, because she's got these two columns here for taxes and debt. So the amount that she would add to the tax base if she wanted to implement this schedule as is 5.6, not 10. But, you know, I'm questioning, you know, buildings last longer than 50 years. You know, having traveled in Eastern Canada and Eastern US, and I've been in some buildings that are 200 and 300 years old. So, and Europe is even older, right? So, and then the other thought is the fire hall, I just use the fire department as an example, but we've got budget areas. And when they manage to be efficient in their budget, and they got a budget of 100,000 and they only spend 90,000. So that 10 goes into general surplus. Maybe that 10 should go into their particular reserve fund, because and we do that with the library right now. I think if they don't spend all their money, it stays in their reserve fund. We don't use it to reduce the next year's contribution to them. And that way you don't get people that are saying, oh gosh, if I don't spend it, I've lost it. So spend it or lose it mentality comes in if you're not, you know, but if you had the incentive that if I don't spend it, if I don't need to spend it, then it goes into the reserve fund if they've been good in managing their money. And I guess the other big thing we need to do with roads, for example, I don't think we've categorized, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, our roads on the island and said, this is an X road, this is a Y road, this is a Z road. The level of standards for X is this, for Y is that, and Z is that. We've talked about size and finish for when they're being built, but we haven't actually categorized all the roads and said what standard we're going to maintain them to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? I'll just make one comment, or maybe two. One is I appreciate the schedule that's been developed, and I appreciate this position that it represents in terms of a really first cut in a lot of ways, but probably more than that in terms of the time spent to develop it. But I think it also emphasizes the importance of the asset management plan generally. Yeah. In terms of that, it just reinforced the fact that we need tools to allow us to plan ahead rather than be reactive as a municipality. I think tools like this are critical for that purpose and can be fine-tuned over time based on plans that are developed. And I also think that as good as this is, and important as it is for disclosure, certainly at council, I think I would want to put some additional information relative to sort of to what the points are relative to it. Only that people will possibly just sort of freak out when they see numbers like this that aren't maybe provided with additional reporting to sort of temper it. And But on its surface, I think it's a great position at this point to do that, and shows what we're able to do going forward. And that's just my general comment. I wouldn't release this, as I said, without maybe a little more explanation on that point, only because some people who are not used to this kind of reporting might kind of like
Great.
react. But I think it's important that people are aware of this. So it's a great document and a great point to proceed with going forward. Any other comments?
It is out there in the public, Fred, because this is an open meeting and.
I know it is, but
Yeah.
I think our comments are relative. But as I said, if
Yeah.
it gets presented at further meetings or in discussion, I think that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
It just might save some people from understanding what they're actually looking at in terms of information.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Nothing further, we'll move on. Since we're talking about numbers, maybe we can do the quarterly variance report and then we'll do capital project update after that. Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, so let's proceed, please, with the quarterly variance report. Kristen, it's under
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I've prepared the latest quarterly variance report. These numbers were up till September 23rd was the last payroll entry that went in there. So there's still another week or so of spending that's not reflected in here, as well as always the capital projects are always 1 month behind. So given that information, it's not a significant amount of change from where we were at the August update. The variances that you see there in the grant revenues, the provincial grant revenues are, they included that we would, in the budget, we expected that we would have more accomplished on the multi-use path and on the on-island composting. So 793 reduction in grant revenue is related to the less amount of work that it will likely be completed on those two projects. The other contributions, 102,000, that relates to the Knick-Knack Nook contribution, again, to the on-island composting project. So none of those reductions in the revenue side are going to impact operations. The 1.6 is the donation target that we're still looking for from the community with regards to the community center construction project. Again, we do have that Growing Communities Fund grant as a backstop if it's absolutely required to access to complete that project. So there's nothing that we're concerned about, but we would, given the information that we have from the asset management analysis, we would really like potentially to direct funds to support other infrastructure projects on the island. So we really are still working towards raising that revenue for the community center. Most of the departments are in line. There's a bit of a variance on admin and finance that's related to professional fees for the most part that are higher than what we had anticipated. A little bit of an overage potentially. I mean, these are all potential. I'm very conservative when I do my projections, and I like to think that I project at a worst case scenario position rather than being trying to underestimate or lowball what my year-end targets are going to be. So all in all, I believe that operations will come in under budget, and that would potentially lead us to have an operating surplus of about 200,000 added to accumulated surplus for the year. So we'll see how close we are at the end of the year, but I do have no concerns about any significant operational cost overruns at this point in the year.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you very much for the report, Kristen. I appreciate that. Just a comment further, or a question as it related to a point that Allison brought up. If we have capital expenditures that are identified in terms of totals and we don't spend that money, most of them are funded from reserve anyway, I would suspect. So those reserves remain within that reserve, be carried forward for the following year.
Yep.
So it's not lost. So the fact that we may not spend all our money on culverts, for example, or fire equipment or whatever, or sorry, not fleet, it's not fire equipment, fleet equipment, for example, that would just carry forward into the next year.
Yeah, anything that's funded from a reserve, only actual expenditures end up coming out of that reserve. We wait, we gather them all up till the end of the year, and then we do one funding entry at the end of the year. I will add, it's never been a formal policy, but there have in prior years been practices, especially with fire and with parks, where any unspent parks operational money would be contributed to the parks reserve at the end of the year. Same with fire. It's never been a policy. Some people did it, others haven't. What that leads to, though, I mean, a budget is a plan. It's an estimate of what we're going to spend.
Absolutely.
Surpluses in one department offset deficits in others. So if we're then going to take all those extra surpluses and start putting them into the reserves, then those deficits in other departments that, you know, don't have that, you know, like admin and finance, we don't have a reserve for admin and finance. Those sorts of cost overruns then are going to end up coming out of accumulated surplus if you start saving all of those surpluses. So it's a, you know, what's your philosophy? I would prefer that we treat the operating budget as a whole. Any of those surpluses go into accumulated surplus at the end of the year, but I think it starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's just a point of consideration because that kind of highlighted with your reporting of the capital asset funding requirements in the future. So, but just something to think about.
Yeah.
So are we doing the capital expenditure report next?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, are we there yet?
Yeah, we're there.
Okay. Yeah, capital expenditures year to date are coming along. There's the community center obviously is the big one, and you can see that is again, it is a month behind for reporting purposes, but it's just not realistic to think that we're going to grind through the end of the project by December 31st. So Liam, probably is time for him to speak to capital projects a little bit, but definitely we do have a bit of an extended timeline on the community center project. We just met with the contractor earlier this week or last week to discuss a revised timeline.
Okay, so I'll have Liam address that under capital projects.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
The fleet equipment, we had a $330,000 budget and nothing's been spent.
Yeah, the POs have been issued, but we haven't had to pay a deposit yet. I understand that we will be getting them, I think, by the end of October, so that will be used up.
Okay. And the slope and rock stabilization?
Slope and rock stabilization. Yeah, a little bit of work has been done there. It's mostly out in Hood Point.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's my understanding, I might have this wrong, but I think some of that work will also be, the slope and rock stabilization is out of Woods Road, and that work is to be, it may actually be happening right around now, I think.
Yeah.
I remember the scheduled timing of that, so it just hasn't hit the books yet.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other comments, let's move on, please. Thank you for that reporting. Appreciate it. We're looking at updates now we're jumping around, but to 5.1, which is capital projects update. Liam,
Okay,
provide that.
I'll try to start with simple and leave contentious to last. Multi-use path, you'll notice that there's some flagging and cones on Grafton Road just past Artisan Road, just for a short little stretch. There's some residual funds with grant funds as well to be able to do another maybe 80 to 100 meters of multi-use path as we continue to move towards Grafton Lake. So you'll see that work continuing right now. And we are also doing the more detailed design work for the remainder stretch to Charlie's Lane, which is at the start of the S-bend. And we're really just trying to nail down what the what the transition will look like at Charlie's Lane, and we're trying to work with the neighbors there to make sure that their concerns are addressed as much as possible as well. So we've got funding in place for that whole stretch out to Charlie's Lane. We're looking for funding and more a better design for the remainder from Charlie's Lane around to Grafton Lake. And right now it looks like we will be following the roadway. And so that will be a complex stretch, particularly getting around the S bend. And then there is the crossing of the creek of, I guess it's Grafton Creek. I never know the name, or maybe that is Terminal Creek there. But there's that one crossing there, which will be a tricky bit as well. Once we get to Forester Lane by Grafton Road, it is then the developer's responsibility to do the multi-use path from there all the way to Harding Road. And we are working with them to understand what the alignment will look like for there. And so those are the key elements of the multi-use path that we're working on. We did get some good news. I'm gonna shift over to water systems. We did get some good news on the Blue Water and West Side water system work. And so we've been working towards an integration of those three systems and a well optimization program, as well as a pipe replacement program. And so the pipe replacement program is progressing through into the tender process. But the well optimization is kind of put on pause because new development in Blue Water has identified a very high production well in that area. And we want to better understand what the full capacity of that well is and how that could be integrated with the entire West Side system, which may change the scope of that project and reduce some of the well optimization work that was being contemplated. But so that's actually really good news, because that well is a very high production well. So it's something that we really wanted to find in that area, is more supply to satisfy demand. And then we also had great news this summer earlier this year, I should say, with the funding announcement for the Eagle Cliff system, which will be joining the Cove Bay system. And so we're working on the tender package that would go out for that project. But before that advances, we need to solidify the project budget, as well as referendum, or not referendum, sorry, but the elector assent requirements for borrowing for that project. So there's been a lot of work at determining what the cost allocations will be for the different users in that system, because as we connect the Eagle Cliff system to the Cove Bay system, there's an opportunity to pick up folks that weren't in either system. And so there's differential rates for those folks. So that work is progressing quite nicely. And then there's the Cove Bay drinking water treatment plant, which continues to be a challenge and frustration for many. So the latest issue that we've experienced is some of the ceramic filter tubes in the treatment module have been identified as being faulty, and we're waiting for replacement filter tubes from the manufacturer, and we're told that that may take a couple of months. And so it is not a lot we can do from our end. We did have 2 replacement filter tubes on hand for this type of thing, but it's not enough to cover the faulty tubes. And so one of the questions we're thinking about right now is, how many replacement tubes should we be storing on hand to ensure that if this happens again, we don't have to wait several months for replacements. And
How many tubes are there in the 2 trains?
I don't know how many in each. I don't really want to hazard a guess, but But my understanding is that because they are ceramic filters, they should have a very long shelf stable life, and it's not like a membrane filter that is made of some sort of material that has the potential to degrade over time. So I want to look into what the shelf stable life is for a filter so that we can, if they will last indefinitely, then we should buy perhaps a whole replacement set to replace a whole train so that we don't find ourselves in this situation again. And we've been talking with Vancouver. We had a meeting just yesterday with Vancouver Coastal Health about this because trying to get to a resolution on this. And then the on-island composting project, you haven't heard much about it of late. We're still working with a technology provider on some design requirements and trying to nail down a more accurate cost estimate. And we did get approval from the grant funder from the province to extend the grant to March 2025. So that gives us a little more breathing room to work on that. And we're working closely with Bird to better understand what the operating implications are of doing that project. And the public works yard, we're hopeful that we will get some traction on better pricing for options around the public works yard as well. But also it's important to inform this committee about the new mayor's standing committee on infrastructure and asset management, which was identified in the last council meeting. And the committee hasn't actually been fully formed yet. But as a mayor's standing committee, the mayor identifies who will be on that committee. And so there'll be a minimum of 3 members of council and 3 members of the public. And that committee will be looking at a variety of infrastructure related issues. And probably the first one will be the public works yard in terms of siting and costing options and things like that. And so last but not least is the community center. And so Kristen's right, we did have a very in-depth meeting last week. I asked for the architects and the project manager from WSP and the constructors from Golden Globe to all come together, where we had a 3-hour session of just digging into the schedule line by line, because of wanting to get a more accurate assessment of where we will be at for completion and opening. Right now, they're targeting the end of January as a handover date. I personally think that is ambitious and optimistic. And when we look at the schedule, it's entirely possible from a paper exercise and scheduling exercise that they could achieve that. But we all know how construction goes. And so I think a more realistic date might be some point in March. And so they're continuing to say end of January. They may adjust the schedule a little bit as we go. And you know, there may be further delays that are beyond their control, in particular with weather and the ferries. And so I've alerted to them to the ferry disruption because they sometimes do have work being done on Saturdays. And so we're zeroing in very closely on the project schedule and budget as we start to get to what I would call the most critical phase towards completion. And but otherwise, though, touring through the building is pretty exciting because you really start to see the building taking shape. And with the insulation and drywall going up now, it really starts to feel a lot more like the building that we've been envisioning. And so I know that most of the folks on this call have gone for a tour, but Fred, if you ever wanted to, let me know and we can see about trying to get you through there.
Thanks.
And that's it for my update.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Just a quick one. The sewage plant itself, how does, is that all done now?
Well, yes and
I mean, I know you had the
no.
pipe things you had to do, but is it kind of finished? Because
There's still some additional work that's been discovered that we have to do. So the actual attenuation tank is complete and operating. And through that work, though, we've discovered that through that work, two things that need adjustment. One, ideally, the new attenuation tank has a cover over it, and right now you may notice it's just what I would say is just like, just tarps, right? Like it is literally just tarps. And ideally, we can find enough budget to actually put something a little more permanent over top of that to keep the rainwater out. That's the idea of what that tarping is. But there's not a lot of reserve room in that service. And then more frustrating element is we had to replace the air intake and blower for the bioreactors. And I understand that is creating quite a bit of noise, which is disruptive to the neighborhood above on Kate's Hill. And so we've got staff looking at what can be done to mitigate that noise, so that's kind of I wouldn't necessarily call it a deficiency of the project, but it's something that needs to be resolved with certainty. And then adding on to that, we have a significant problem with our outfall. This summer we've had multiple breaches of the outfall in Snug Cove Harbor, and the outfall itself had to be severed so that it's now discharging in a location that isn't where the permit is, the discharge permit for, and because the outfall line itself had got pinched or tangled, and so we had to call out divers a number of times to patch the outfall, and because we are out of compliance with our permit, it's something that needs immediate attention, and that you'll see in the budget information that'll be coming your way in the near future that we are anticipating a significant cost for replacing that outfall.
Okay, thank you. I just had a follow-up on that, and then I'll go to Kristen and then to Judy. Have we determined at this point, has a study been completed to determine whether we have additional capacity for all the people that were looking for approvals for their residential developments?
Right, so we did have the consultants complete an analysis earlier this year, and the report back identified that there was sufficient capacity to accommodate the properties on Foxglove Lane. And so all of those lots have been given the green light to be able to connect to the sewer. There is still risk of the system being at capacity or potentially even exceeding capacity in a really heavy rain event. So we are cautioned about adding any more connections to the system beyond that. And I do know that there are some other properties on Kate's Hill that would be looking to connect that we really can't at this time. And then any redevelopment within the cove that would increase load to the system is being put on hold until we can increase the capacity of the treatment plant, which is essentially what we call phase 2. And initially phase 2 was going to be a minimum $6 million project, but we realized that it's very difficult to finance that. And so we're trying to look at how do we do a smaller phase that can be more achievable from a financing perspective. And we're very close to finalizing a draft DCC bylaw, which would help finance that. But we're trying to work on what the commercial rate structure will be for that DCC. And once we have that established, we will engage the development community to look at what those DCC costs might be. And then with their feedback, we would then come to this committee and council with what that draft bylaw and policy would look like. And so I'm hoping that we can do that this fall. But I'll be really honest that even with the DCC, I'm very concerned about how we will actually afford to do any phase 2. So
Yeah,
even the outcome.
I appreciate that. Kristen, did you have a comment? And then I'm gonna go, I think, to Judy after that.
Just the comment regarding the outfall, that's a replacement of an existing piece of infrastructure for the sewer. It's there could be a component of the outfall that theoretically could be charged to future development, but for the most part, it's replacement of existing. And that is, it needs to be done based on the number of call outs that we've had this year. And just, Liam's words that reserve fund is tight. Reserve fund in the sewer is 0. So there is absolutely no funding identified within the sewer itself to pay for it. So we are going to have to come back with a financing plan that most certainly is likely going to include debt to replace that big piece of infrastructure.
Thank you. Yeah, gorilla tape. Judy.
The last item that we talked about before Liam's report was the list of capital projects and an update. And all the water districts and the sewage district are local service areas. So I'm assuming that's why they're not included. But it is something that we need to keep in mind in terms of the overall debt load for the people that are in those service areas. So is there some way of maybe an addition to the subcategories to the capital projects update report? I think that everybody needs to keep that in mind.
Yeah, I can. I think I had it on one and then I overwrote the template and I didn't have time to get those back in there. So yeah, I'll work and improve it for future reporting, that I give you an update on utilities as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions for Liam? Seeing none, thank you, Liam. Appreciate the reporting and the updates. Seth, I think we're kind of moving along here. We're now looking at information items. I don't think there's anything for reporting on that right now. I don't think we have any questions or anybody that has asked relative to any items or anything. Our next meeting is scheduled now for December the 8th at 9:30. Really, yeah. And so I think we're at the point of adjournment. If there's no additional questions or comments, Judy first.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you very much. I guess we're adjourned. Thank you.
Enjoy
everybody.
the sunshine.
I appreciate it and have a good Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks, Fred. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.